will you call the meeting to order, please?
Councilors Tillotson,
Here.
Crumpets,
Here.
Dobos,
Here.
Labrie,
Here.
Roy.
Here. The ordinance committee will begin with one item, that is the, raises for the, elected officials and the, raises for the, counselors and the school committee. That's what this is. It's in two phrases. Is there anyone in the audience gonna tape or videotape or audio tape the meeting?
Oh, you want him to read the order?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to call them.
Oh, can you read the order?
When we get to it,
Okay, all right.
okay? Would you come up, please, Mr. Rosebeer, and your assistant? There's two parts to this order. One is the raise for the city councilors, and the other one is a raise for everybody at the bottom based on a, formula that he's gonna talk to us about. So there's two parts to this, what we're doing tonight. No, it's not that simple to just read the announcement. It's more complicated than that. The first section has to do with increasing the salaries for the, school committee members and the city councilors. The second piece down the bottom is tying us to some other source in order to, determine our rate next time we get a raise, so that we don't have to worry about it anymore. It would be automatic. So we're gonna, Mr. Rosebeer, why don't you come right up here with us?
Okay.
Or unless you feel more comfortable there.
Oh, it's perfectly fine. I'm not sure if you're gonna be able to.
Okay.
You can stay at your desk.
Yeah.
There's not enough microphones here.
Right, that's good, yeah. Okay.
Perfectly fine with me. Either one is fine. All right, well,
Call a roll,
Councilors Tillotson,
here.
Labrie,
Yes, here.
Roy,
Yes, here.
I'm sorry, the wrong one. Tillotson,
Here.
Crumpets,
Here.
Dobos, Labrie,
Yes,
Roy.
Yes.
On a quorum, we will begin the meeting. Yeah, I gave a brief introduction and I'll turn the meeting over to you.
understood.
Yep.
All right.
The first section, I think, is pretty self-explanatory, but you could go through that with us if you'd like.
I think you need to read the order.
I just got through telling you it's more complicated than reading it now. Okay, there's no order here. There's two parts. I just went over it for you.
Okay, right.
The school department raises, the raises for the city councilors and the raises for the school committee. That's the first part. I said that already once. And that's separate from the bottom piece. So we're gonna talk about the first one first. And you may want to vote one up and not vote for the other one. So that's why I'm doing it in two parts.
So, Counselor, just so I can ensure that I understand where we're at, the first part, to my understanding, references the scale or the schedule for wage increases. Am I understanding that correctly?
I didn't hear you very well.
The first part is referencing the schedule for the wage increases. So, for example, the mayor's increase is set to increase to 122,000 as of 1/1/23. Is that?
Yeah, yeah, but we're talking about the one, what we're talking up there would be the 124, which we haven't voted on yet.
Okay. So essentially.
So that involves the city council and the school committee.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're speaking about just the city council and the school committee.
Yeah.
Understood.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
So at the time that this wage study was conducted, which was in December of 2020, it provided a formula that benchmarked all positions within Group 1 of the Chapter 7 ordinance to a set wage amount, which is what you have before you. So in the first part, this is adjusting the compensation for the counselors in the school committee, if adopted by the school committee, from where they're at, utilizing the same formula that was used for every other elected official here, to what was proposed. The second part speaks to a systematic formulation for a cost of living adjustment to be applied.
Correct.
Okay. So essentially in the first amount, or for the first part of this order, based on what was sent to me, my understanding is that it would take the city council from, the president of the city council from 13,000 to 15,000 effective of 2024. sorry. The city councilors themselves from 12,000 to 14,000, effective 1/1/24. And then if adopted by the school committee, respectively, from vice chair to members, 6,500 to 8,000 and 6,000 to 7,500, effective 1/1/24.
Yes, right. That's the first part of the thing, which would not tie us to any, cost of living situation as.
That is correct.
As the bottom does.
Correct.
Yeah,
So the first one just realigns you to be competitive in the market. So just as we had done with all the elected officials,
yeah,
we conducted a regionalized
right,
wage study that pretty much compared where we were with respect to other like positions in the given area that was adopted by the city council in
Right.
2021.
yeah. I guess my concern here is now whether the city councilors want to, accept the 124 and then go down and talk about the second piece after we decide whether they want to support the raise for 124.
Yeah, what I would argue as a compensation specialist would be that there should be some systematic approach to how compensation is levied for all positions, including elected positions, including those of the legislative branch of the city.
Right.
So that said, it's at the discretion of the council if they choose to accept that or not. But the data that was presented in the wage study is what gave you that suggestion.
Right.
So in my professional opinion, there should be some kind of competitive pay that's tied to all of these positions. And there should be some kind of systematic approach that accounts for the adjustments that get applied in the future. Because even though we all serve a particular capacity to the operations of this business, in time, the cost of living adjusts, and therefore the value of the position should.
Correct. But the ones we're talking about with the school committee and those are, we could support that and then still support the one at the bottom.
Of course.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because, if the city councilors don't want to take the 124 and want to go only use the bottom one, as a means of a raise, that's fine too. I'm just here to try to explain the best I understand it, and we talked about it several times now, so.
Of course.
Yeah, so I guess I need to hear from some of my colleagues as to what they want to do. Do you want to vote to accept the raise for 1/1/24, and then figure out what we want to tie ourselves to? Do we want to tie ourselves to the administrative employees contract, or do we want to tie ourselves to the state cost of living situation? Or there were some other options that you just passed out to us.
Yeah. So that, I think, speaks to the second half. I don't know if you want to
But
take this in
that-
halves.
That would only apply to the bottom part of the page.
It will apply to the COLAs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Then I think we're on the same page.
Okay.
Okay,
So just for your reference, what you have before you is a breakdown that provides examples of the options that were provided to you in the COLA submission that was provided in 2021. So in April of 2021, there were essentially 4 options that were given to you. All right. And option 1 means that you take the administrative contract and you apply on the years ending in 0 and 6. All right. And this is to justify or offset the fact that different elected officials run elections in different cycles, so that these COLAs are not tied to the benefit for any one particular person in that position. So, for example, if a mayor decided to run 1 year, did that term, but then in the next term, that mayor, whomever that person would be, decided not to run, when that COLA applied, they can't say that they tied their running to an increase, because the increase is applied objectively to the position, not the person in it, which is one piece. This is why it's for years ending in 0 and 6. But then how that amount equates over a substantial period of time, if you operate on what I hear the school department refer to as deltas, this percentage must always stay consistent to whatever is paid for at this percentage. For example, if you took that and you took the administrative contract, that's your department head's union, then you figured out in the 3 years prior to 2026, they got 2% in each year, then that 6% is the COLA that's tied to group 1 of the ordinance. That's essentially what option 1 proposes. Option 2 proposes that the council adopt a set percentage that stays consistent and is put into the ordinance And every year that percentage is the tied COLA until something is reviewed at some later point down the line and the council adopts an option to change that at some period. That's another option. Option 3 is periodically we assess the CPI or what the inflation rate is in Massachusetts, and then you tie the COLA to that. But there's pros and cons to all of them. These are simply designed to just give you options. You know, I'll go start with option 3 and work my way backwards. In option 3, the con is if for some reason the inflation rate moves in the opposite direction. You know, what does that mean? Do you give yourself decreases in your salary? That wouldn't necessarily be just to do so. Option 2, if that 1% that everyone adopts now, in theory, is, let's say it's 1.5% every year consistently, and for some reason 1.5% isn't nearly the cost of living in terms of the inflation increase, that 1.5% may not be just for you all, you know, or just for any of the positions in that group. And then option 1, which is the first one I had referenced, and tying it to a contract, at least we know it's something that has been adopted and accepted by that group and it's applied to some portion of your workforce and therefore is consistent with what other increases are. Those are the 3 options you have before you. But what option you choose is best is really at the discretion of this panel. If you're asking my opinion is that any of these would be effective if it's done right and is consistent. But if we all know that we have given a COLA that's tied to our professional managers, then perhaps that body of a COLA should be what's considered for the elected officials and the managers of those managers. I welcome any questions you may have.
Yeah. If you have any questions, and by the way, this didn't come from any of the councilors. This was put on there by the mayor, as far as I know.
Well, this wage study came from the Human Resources Department.
What's that?
The wage study and the COLA assessment
Yeah,
came
but
from
I
the Human
mean,
Resources Department.
It was put on our agenda by the mayor. It wasn't put on by any one of our councilors, is what I'm trying to say. It was a mayor's officer, I think, that put it on there. So that's why a lot of us are confused and how, you know, as to how this is gonna work. Fred?
I did have a question for Paul. Now on the cost of living adjustments, you know, there's the 3 options. Is that something that could be, all the elected officials would be tied to that, or could you break it up that, let's say, all the, for lack of a better term, full-time elected officials could be on like option 1, and then the council and the others would be like on option 2 or something like that?
That is possible.
Okay.
That is very much possible.
Yes.
Out of these options, that as well. So for example, let's say we agreed, this is a theoretical, to 3%, right?
Yeah.
Let's say 3 years from now, the bargaining unit agreement, they only get an increase of 1%. Then it's really unfair for counselors or other elected folks to be getting 2% more than them. So in order to keep it fair across the board, I think option 1 makes the most. It ties us to the same increase as everyone else, and whether that's smaller than what we would have thought for that year, that's fine, because that's what everyone is getting.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
What do other cities and towns do? They follow any of these formulas?
So this is a brand new thing, I think, for Western Massachusetts, and I'm just going to put that out there. When I did this wage study in 2020 with Rich Merchant, I mean, this was not something that is a common question for most governments in the area. I think that's what our data found, is that it's really hard, and I'll say this in the words of Council President Frank LaFlamme, to say that it's apples to apples. And I remember at a period of time when this was being discussed, just with respect to the wage study, that it's not apples to apples. I mean, it's hard to make that kind of determination. And we aligned our assessment and our approach, our methodology, to the most consistent and objective way possible. But to say that a city is doing any of these, it's not happening. Or to say that there's a system in place, that's not typically the status quo. But, you know, if we're looking to set ourselves apart, or if we're looking to just do what's fair in layman terms, I mean, it comes down to, there should be some systematic approach that accounts for the elected officials and what their compensation is. And it's just with any group. I mean, one of the focuses of my time and my tenure here has been for pay equity with the majority of our positions. And I think we've addressed just about almost every group. Group one would be the second to last, in my professional opinion, and then you have the non-union workforce, or group two, as we identify them as. But with respect to your question, there's not really a cut and dry answer to give you. There's not really a systematic approach that is set up, from what I understand.
I tend to agree with Counselor Lopez, because that probably would be the most fairest option that we could address. Because we want to be fair to the council and the school committee, but we want to be fair to what goes on with collective bargaining. And depending on how the economy is going, I mean, there were times in the school department, they didn't get any pay raises. Teachers did not get pay raises for a few years. So therefore, the school committee would have to follow suit for that particular collective bargaining unit. Would that be correct?
I can say that that's possibly happened. You know, with that respect, I mean, there's been time where city bargaining units hadn't received COLAs in years past. And I think what it identifies is that to manage compensation strategically, it should be equitable. There should be systematic periods when these items are reviewed. There should be set periods of time when these are changed. If they are changed, it has to be with respect to pay parity. You have to tie it to something, and it has to systematically make sense. So if you're asking my professional opinion, I mean, could any of these work? Sure. Could one work in combination with the other? Sure. But how, as leaders, you know, if I was to say that, you know, we're setting a benchmark for others to say, this is what we'll accept for you all, could one argue that we're not going to accept that, except more or less than the other? You know, and it goes both ways. I mean, you all do an effort. You're not here for nothing. I mean, you're doing it for something. There's a compensable value to that. What you tie that to should make sense. So if the group chooses to go with option one, could it serve you well? Sure.
Yeah. I just have a question. So say, for example,
Wait a minute, go through the chair, please.
oh, I'm sorry, Jim.
Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Say, for example, the schools get a raise, the teachers, but sometimes their raise may be different than the custodians. So how would we apply this with the school committee? Because there's so many different unions with the schools than there are probably within the city. City may not have that kind of different unions. I don't know. But I do know in the school department, I mean, you got your custodians, you've got your nurses, you know, you've got your paras, you got your teachers. So in the last contract, I think the teachers got 9%, but I don't think the custodians did.
No, they all vary.
They all vary.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you're a school committee,
I think Sharon might have the answer for that.
They're just, the way this ordinance is written, they're tying it to the city admin union.
okay, so it wouldn't.
That's where they're tying it.
Okay, so if you're on the school committee, you don't have to follow suit with their unions. Okay, okay.
Yeah, a lot of times school department raises are higher than city.
Bottom line is not that the school department or the school committee doesn't get a raise unless it comes to us to begin with.
Okay.
We have to approve it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, they just can't vote themselves a raise. It has to come through here.
Mr. Laflamme has
Yeah, go ahead. I couldn't see it.
So, Paul, you know, there's no conflict of how we do it.
Right. That's it.
So it doesn't
Correct. Yeah. Yes. And that's true. I mean, because it may come to a point, I mean, I sat in on all of these negotiations this time around for the city, you know, and in 6 negotiations, I mean, they're not the same, to your point, Counselor. And to yours, there isn't a conflict of interest because you're just approving wages, you know, but if the city, if any of these bargaining units came with an amount that, you know, wasn't financially responsible of the city to agree to, we would bargain against that for it to be fair, because we have to consider the bottom line. In everything that we do, we must consider the bottom line. And to your point, that's right. You could tie it to that. To your question, the school could tie the school committees to perhaps a bargaining unit on the school side. They have that option. You know, this was to give ideas, but what the choice is ultimately yours. So honestly, if you tied it or centralized it to a city bargaining unit as the department or leadership-based professional union, that being the CPMEA to be more exact, that's perfectly doable. You know, but that's at the discretion here. Is there a conflict there? No, because the city council is not the one bargaining. It's our bargaining committee that's bargaining. And what we come to is mutually agreed upon. It's not something that we force. We don't go to a union and say, this is what you're giving, what we're giving you, and that's it. One, that's probably constructive bargaining that's not really beneficial. We like to take integrative approaches in modern times. But as far as what that means in terms of conflict, there isn't one. The choice is yours. You know, I'm just here to provide you a roadmap of what these options would look like, so that you have an option A, B, or C. And honestly, if you all voted to say, hey, we need to see more other options, there are others out there. These were just the 3 that we came up with at the time that seemed logical based on the data that we had presented.
No, that's what makes the most sense. And that answers Councilor Costello's question about, at this point, they don't tie it to the teachers union or any of that. It's the whole point of how this is written, how the first option is written, is it ties everyone to the same exact administrative group so that everyone's getting the same raise. And there's no question about, like, what about the teachers and what their raises? It doesn't matter, because everyone's being tied to the same group of employees. It takes the guesswork out.
The CPMA is the administrative unit. It's the professional. Well, they are in that group.
That's not what this says. This is the admin. Ordinance refers to admin, not CPMEA.
And the same process would still apply.
Same process, but this is tying it to admin, not to department.
Which is fine.
That's the way it's written, but you could, but
Yeah.
it's not engraved in stone. It could
No,
be.
it's not. And that's the point that I'm trying to drive, is that if you tied it to the administrative unit, excellent. I mean, you follow that unit, you follow that COLA, and if, you know, and that means if for some year they got 3, 3, and 3, I think there was a unit on the school side that got that, but that's not my here to say. But, you know, if you tied it to that, that's great. And if they got 0, 1, and 2, then, you know, 3 is what you got. If you add it all up, then that's what that gets tied to, but at least it's consistent. And that's the idea of what was proposed, is that's consistent and it's tied to something. If we're going to say that this is what we're paying them, then perhaps this is what we should be paying ourselves.
I think it's, the only time that doing this could run into a problem is if we've had some times in the last 10 years where we've done wage studies. Raises have been like this all over the place, even in the admin group. You know, somebody was misaligned, we're moving, some people got, even in the same group, everybody didn't get a 2%, in a perfect world, everybody gets a 2% raise. That's not what has been happening recently.
No.
You know, even in my own department, you know, the bottom of the totem pole, so to speak, got a bigger raise to kind of boost them up, to bring them in line with reality. And the people that were kind of higher up, they didn't get so much to kind of some of the lower people. So yeah, something like that happening, it could be a little bit difficult to do this. That was the only thought that entered my mind, but it certainly makes sense to tie them to admin, like in the last CPMEA contract. they got a different kind of boost. They didn't always get their boosts at the same time. They got a boost to go into 40 hours from 35, so they all got a big jump. It wasn't a percentage increase, it was a boost to 40 hours. I think they got a percentage too, but there's a lot of things that come into
Yeah.
to play.
Yeah,
Sometimes it's not a percent,
right.
but in a perfect world, it would be a percent.
Yep.
That's how it used to be. Collective bargaining is a whole new animal now.
It is. And to write on what Auditor Riley was saying is that essentially, it can vary, and that can happen. Typically, when we bargain for contracts, we're bargaining COLAs based off percentages. So, in my understanding, I think what that references is that there were studies that were done in the past by different entities and people
Outside sources.
that perhaps didn't necessarily account for all the appropriate data, and therefore individuals got benchmarked in places that didn't create a fair parity amongst that group. But what ultimately happened was those things got addressed, and the dollar amount or the grade classification assigned to those positions were changed. But what it does for the body of the contract is that the COLAs are consistent. It's tied to a percentage rather than a dollar amount. Any other questions?
Could you explain what it says, 3 years percentage wage increase for administrative employees, collective bargaining unit agreement? I think most of us agree that we'd tie it to that unit. That would be where we would probably make the most sense.
Sure.
But what it says, how does that work? 0 and then, fiscal years ending in 0 and 6, by the sum of the preceding 3 years percentage wage increases for the administrative employees. Could you give us an example of that? Take 80,000, you were making $80,000 just for a number. And how would that work? Let's say let's say 24, because that's when, if we go at the top as well for the counselors, they would get a raise on the January 1, 24. Their salary would go up.
Okay.
And
So let's say,
three members' salaries would go up.
so I gave you an example in my submission to you tonight, but I think to further expand on that example, if
Okay.
you had a salary of $80,000, okay, and we tied it to the admin contract, and let's say the admin contract said that the 3 prior years from that year that we're looking to apply it was 2, 2, and 2. Collectively, that's 6%. All right. So if you took that $80,000 and you added 6%, you go from 80,000 to 84,800, or $84,800. That's 6% added on.
Okay.
That formula is consistent. So then when the next time that comes around, you just apply the formula, and whatever the preceding 3 years for COLAs were, that percentage, that collective percentage is what you apply. And that's done. Can you hear me? Okay. That's done that way because there's a gap between 0 and 6. There's a 6-year gap, essentially. But a lot happens in that period of time, so you should tie it to something. Does that make sense? Any other questions?
Still a little confusing, but I understand what you're saying.
Yes. Yes. Correct.
But it's retroactive for for that time for each of the years. You won't go 11, like elected officials went 11 years without getting a raise. That won't happen again. You'll account for each year, even though it's not all in each year. Right,
Correct.
right.
Correct. Yes.
But you'll still get your retroactive check. Right?
I got a question for sure. Karen,
Sorry.
how many years has it been since the council's had a raise?
A minute, didn't you just have one in
16.
January 4th of 22? Before that, a really long time, Jerry.
Yeah.
Very long time, over 11 years.
Yes, go ahead.
So I just don't really understand the need to make it happen every 6 years instead of just making it much easier administratively and going with the regular COLA increase every year. Or from an ordinance standpoint, instead of having, because what I'm hearing is retroactively, what's gonna happen is you're gonna add up the increase for over those 6 years. So let's say each year added up 1%, right? So at that 6-year mark, you're gonna have to increase by 6%. That's a much bigger jump and kind of an unnecessary one at that point. If instead you just went every year and increased by that 1% and kept a steady increase in the same way as the admin group. So we can't even like
Laws
make
that
it
come into
ordinance.
play where you can't vote your raises.
That was the
Am I
reason
right?
why it was proposed that way.
Dan, I think
Even
so.
if it's
I think
ordinance.
there's Mass General laws that says about when you can vote raises for, mayor and city council and stuff. Right, so I
So
think,
every 2 years rather than 6 years, because that's technically what the gap is, so that the increase is not as large at the 6-year mark. That makes sense?
I mean, you could do it that way.
yeah, I don't know what the rationale for doing it in years with a six. I mean, there's numerous. I think it was a way, like Paul, explained earlier, of it, not being for a particular individual, because it's out, you know, over time. So it's not, committee necessarily voting for themselves. It's like it's expected every year that are in the room. So if you're doing it every 6 years, granted, you wait for it back to the last year ending in 6. So you get it, but you get it retroactively. More work for my office, but
It's
kinda
also
get
like a
used
much
to it.
bigger jump. It's also a much bigger jump, so
It's a
like,
bigger jump.
so technically if we did it every 2 years, technically you're voting for the next round. So it's technically not voting for yourself at that point. It's still a smaller increase.
Yeah, for counselors, it's not that big anyway, because, you know, they're part-time. It'd be certainly more of a jump for full-time elected officials.
For all the categories, an increase every cycle rather than every 3 cycles. That would be a much smaller jump.
So for all that, you do it every 3 years.
The way that it's happening now, I mean, admin got 222. Not even keeping up with cost of living. I
But
mean,
at
if you
least,
think about
at
it.
least admin gets it at that time instead of having to wait 6 years
Mhm.
to get, that's just a long time to wait and also like a larger increase. And so it makes more sense to cut that so that folks are getting it instead of having to wait 6 years. Especially for the admin folks, not even just like, you know, yeah, I think it makes more sense to cut it and not. I understand why every year it can't happen. If we can cut it from 6 to 3, that would make more.
You can do that.
Mr. Chairman, can I
Yeah.
just ask a quick question?
Sure.
Thanks. Why did you pick 0 and 6?
They were just to provide an example.
Okay, so it's negotiable then.
Oh, all of these
Yeah.
options are negotiable.
Okay.
Yeah, it was to provide a rationale. So the selection of the set numbers weren't because we felt that these were the best years to do it. You could have filled that blank with any of those numbers. I mean, you shouldn't do it every year. My professional opinion wouldn't be that you do it every year. I think there's a significant potential conflict of interest, or at least the illusion of such, that creates unnecessary issues. You know, every 2 years, that's an option, but certain election cycles run in biannually. So then that's an issue. My professional opinion therefore out is you do it every 3 years, you know, every 5 years, every 6 years, you know, not too long. 6 years is perhaps spanned it out, but any of those options are options to you. The idea of the option was that it ties relevantly to a contract, that you can say that, listen, this body of employees got this percentage. We're going to get something that's similar in nature to that too, if not the same. And in such a span of time, so that it wasn't a matter of it being tied to any one person's individual benefit.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
To get reelected, yeah.
I think 2 years is the
2 years
number
makes
that
more
we look
sense.
at.
Get elected, you're good for 2.
If that happens, that could be reviewed again in the ordinance committee, like if the charter changes to 4, we could change this back on the floor.
Oh, of course. And I mean, if you set the COLA based on a certain amount, right? I mean, all this stuff is public information. Our collective bargaining agreements are online. So, you know, what that percentage is, if it's in the ordinance that we're gonna base it off of this, you can do the math and figure out what the dollar amount is. You know, so that that information is still there and it's still relevant. If we come to an agreement on a contract and we know that contract is set for 3 years, we know what that percentage is going to be in advance. If you did the math in advance, you find out what the answer to that question is in advance. For anyone that's considering to run for a particular office, will know what that dollar amount is in advance, therefore.
Chairman, if I may, through the chair. So Paul, could you give us the difference between 2 and 3 years? Because you said that you didn't recommend 2 years, you recommended 3. Could you give us some explanation as to why?
I mean, so the difference of time, let's say you did 6, all right? You have 6 years. There's a gap in a period of time. One, there's a series of cycles for elected officials that happen over that long span of time. But in 2 years, it's essentially at the end of one's term. If someone is voting on that in the 2-year span that they're in office, what that theorizes is that they have the ability to essentially figure out what they're going to make or what they want to set themselves to make going into the next cycle or the next election, per se. If you do it in 3, it's in the middle of a term. My understanding is that not all counselors operate on the same term too. So, or that there's, I'm sorry, that there's a, you all do it there? School committee, I'm sorry, that's what I
I
mean.
think that's why when we did this ordinance, the first one, January 4th of 22, and then of 23, and possibly 24, that's why they did it out into the future, because of the elections. They weren't voting on the raises for now.
Yeah.
They were voting on something that would happen after the election took place.
Right.
So they didn't know who was gonna be there, so they weren't voting for themselves. It could be them, but they didn't know that at that time.
But
So
2 years
that's
still
why-
does that. So what's the difference between 2 and 3 years? Because 2 years, let's say we vote now, 2 years from now, that's a whole another cycle anyways. What, is it just optics, the difference between 2 and 3 years?
I mean, essentially, it's at the discretion of what the group wants to do. I mean, it's really what it comes down to. It's not based on, like, I'm not the one that makes that decision. I just give you options. Here's what your options are. If you did it in 2 years, you do it in 2 years. If you did it in 3 years, you did it in 3 years. In terms of, you know, who votes what and when, that's what I was referencing in terms of the difference for elected bodies, school, because this accounted for all of them, including the school committee.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you did it in that period of time, at least there's a gapped period of time where it's, all right, you're not voting for your own wage. You don't know who's going to be in that seat. So that's really at the bottom of this group to come to what you're comfortable with.
I guess, can we come to any kind of a consensus here, on what we want to do? Do we want to, yeah, go
I
ahead.
have one more question for
Sure.
Paul through the chair. What's the average length of a contract?
3 years.
3 years.
The fourth is usually if you do like a 1 and 3. So like, let's say you had to do, I know with one of our groups, we had to do a 1 year for retro, and then we did a 3-year contract.
Because I was kind of leaning maybe towards the 3 years so that it's kind of in sync with
Mm-hmm.
the length of what an average contract is. I know contracts start at different times for different unions. The 3, because if we vote for this, we'd be tied to the admin, union, so.
Okay.
If theirs is typically 3 years, then maybe, I'm just kind of like throwing it out there, that maybe a 3-year.
I'm just trying to understand the differences, but 3 years is fine.
Yeah, at the bottom, yeah, everybody.
Does that create an issue for you, Sharon, with whether it's 2
That
or
we
3
didn't know
or?
we has to. Council against the rate. It's on a-
Believe me, there's a lot harder ones than this.
Okay.
Talk about police and fire.
Not talking about those contracts, actually.
I agree with the 3.
This is nothing.
No, right, you know, you're not here for that 1 year, Sharon says you get a retro check. Frank will get it home.
What was that?
She did not say
What
that.
was that?
Something about a
Could you talk
restaurant
into
check.
the microphone, please? Gary? Sorry.
That's all right.
So in order to make it 3, do we need to make an amendment to this, or, because the way this motion is written, it's just options. So does a new motion need to go on the floor to approve a specific option and make it, and amend it to be 3 rather than 6?
Are you talking about the 24, the one on the top or the one on the bottom?
The bottom.
Yeah, yeah, if we can amend it on the, unless we change it completely, I think according to my background with Councilor Garvey, you can make minor adjustments, but you can't change the whole thing.
So would 3 instead of 6 years be a minor adjustment?
I think so.
Okay, perfect. No, because the 0 and the 6 are just when the years change. So it's not like 0 to 6. That's not what this is written. This is written years that end in 0 and years that end in 6. This is not saying 0 to 6 years.
I have a question for Dan. This was submitted by the mayor. Do we have the authority?
Yeah, we can change the ordinances,
All right.
yeah.
Do we need to do that tonight, or do we do that at the full council meeting?
No, we can amend it tonight. Well, would you write out what you want to change?
I mean, I technically don't sit on this committee. It really is as simple as choosing the first option and changing it to, instead of fiscal years ending in 0 and 6, you could change it to fiscal years ending in 0, in 4, in, then in, yes, that's it. That's, I think it's administration, correct?
One thing to remember when you're tying it to the admin too is the raises for city council are all listed here as calendar year. Our collective bargaining goes on a fiscal year,
Okay.
7/1 to 6/30. They're all listed as January. And for obvious reasons, because that's when they come into the role, so it's usually, January.
Should we change
So
it
it's just
then?
something to keep in mind if you're gonna tie it to the admin contract, and the admin contract is
Right, that's a good point.
FY
Yeah.
22, 23, or 24, those 3 years. Wanna make it in line, you might wanna be adjusting dates too. That's I just wanna mention that, because we run on a fiscal year.
Right, that makes sense.
Makes a lot, it doesn't really change anything other than when it.
No,
when
it's just if
comes-
you're really tying it to collective
Yeah,
bargaining and
yeah.
you want the raises to be for the same time frame, we run on a fiscal. I'm not telling you to do that, I'm just saying that's how admin is 7/1.
Yeah.
It doesn't,
Right,
you can keep that. You can just say that you're gonna do it in the middle of the year for that year, but then you're not it's the first year and the last year, you're into another fiscal year, you know what I mean? Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the point. Yeah.
you're just creating the system.
Method of doing it, right.
So would you add that after you put in, fiscal years ending in 0, 4, and 7, and 7/1? Is that the way you?
Yep.
For the
By
record,
the
0,
sum of
4,
the
and 7
proceedings.
doesn't actually give us, so like, it's weird because even when we did years 0 and 6, that was technically every 5 years, if you really think about it. If we do every 3 years, maybe we should not write the ordinance talking about what fiscal years end. We just say every 3 fiscal years from here on forth. It would make more sense than doing the dates that it ends in.
Do that too.
It's like, when this is approved, as of the date of when it's approved, every 3 fiscal years after. Just like verbiage, that makes more sense in terms of,
That works.
Has to be clear, so that
Yes.
what the effective date is and for what fiscal year.
Inclined to postpone it to the call of the chair and have, our human resource director come up with what we've been talking about, so that we're all agreeing to it. I haven't been able to keep up with what's been going on here and run the meeting at the same time, so I'd rather, as long as we get it done before the end of the year, we are okay. We gotta do it between now and December 31st, and I'd like to have a better document than we've got here. Have we decided we're not gonna take the raises, as on 1/1/24? We're not gonna do that.
Right.
What? No, that's not.
We can do both.
Right.
You can do both.
Exactly. You can do
Right.
this
Yeah.
and then get in line with fiscal
We're
year.
still
You
getting
can
our
still do
word
the
in
January
one
1st
way.
and
We're
24th.
gonna vote the 1/1/24.
Yeah.
It's not or, it's
And then we're
and
gonna
or.
modify this to go along in the future.
Yeah, it's not or, it's and or. Like, we can do both things or we can do one thing. It would make sense to do and because you do the effective 1/1/24
Yeah.
and then you get in the fiscal line schedule.
And then we get into then we go on to the system at the bottom.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, all right. Okay.
It's effective, if you wanna make that effective 7/1/24 going forward.
No, the bottom portion.
The bottom portion. The top will be 1/1/24.
We gotta change it
Yeah.
from 06 and all the rest of it.
But it's-
Exactly.
but that's
So it'll have
an
to be
easy fix.
rewritten.
It's gotta be rewritten.
But you want
That's
the
my
date
point.
in there
That's why I like
effective
to
7/1
postpone it to the call
24. So it falls in
And
line.
have him
Do
rewrite
we
it
need
the
to-
way it's supposed to
Through
be.
the chair to Attorney Garvey, if I may. Do
Sure.
we need to postpone it, or is that a minor, because we talked about it being a minor change, can we just have it rewritten and change it on the floor at the next council meeting, instead of having to postpone it, guys?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I'm not the person that writes, I don't write the orders. I mean.
I just wanna make sure we get it done right so that we don't have a problem when we get it, on the floor.
So, yeah,
So Sharon can have that ready for us.
we
by-
can, we'll talk. We can get it ready for the next council meeting to come in with the amended ordinance. It won't be that big a
So we don't
deal.
need to postpone it, we can.
I think we can get in for with the minor adjustment, to have it voted on
For next week?
for the next, yeah.
So I think what makes sense is to do a motion to approve, send a
We'll do-
motion to
we can do it
approve
tomorrow.
through. She'll get you the information for the next meeting, and then on the floor, when we're approving, we make an amendment to how to the new language, and then approve that on the floor.
We'll have the correct one by then.
Perfect.
Right,
Yeah.
you'll be looking at it, everybody will be able
It'll
to see
be
it,
on the
which-
agenda, you'll have it all corrected by then,
Exactly.
okay, all right, that's my concern, I don't wanna have, I don't wanna
Perfect.
wind up having to try to, at a regular public meeting, trying to figure out what to
Right.
do, it's gotta be squared away.
In advance.
Yes.
and it,
Based
and-
on the administrative.
And just know that paragraph at the bottom, a 3-year admin contract might not happen in a nice, timely fashion, right? Well, so in other words, we're in a 3-year contract right now, the admin union. Started what, 7/1/22?
Yes.
22. So when that contract is up, they'll have already started negotiations, but there's not gonna be a new contract in place immediately when that other one ends, chances are. So there might be a time that goes by and you have to wait, and then there'll be the ever dreaded retro.
If it goes
So
up.
it's, it would be the perfect world, it runs seamless into the next, doesn't happen.
Not
It
with
doesn't-
contracts.
We didn't
Does
have
it?
retro this time.
It doesn't happen.
And even if it has to be retro, it still goes into the.
Exactly, you don't lose anything, it's just, you wait until the admin contract gets ratified. And you'll know when that is, because it comes before you.
Yeah. Okay, so you'll get it ready for
I
next
will,
week,
I'll do that tomorrow.
okay.
Can I bring
yeah,
up one other,
the motion, yes.
Can I bring up one more issue?
Sure.
Which is really, I don't know if it's okay that I do. It's not really, it's something that Dan and I have talked about. This, taking things out of order brought something very, problematic to my office to light. At the time you called me, Jim, about this, you were wondering why these raises for the counselors and the school committee were not, were on the latest ordinance that you had.
Right.
Well, years back, I was required by the law department from city clerk that we always submit a completed, up-to-date Chapter 7 ordinance every time there's an ordinance committee meeting. So, and on the second page of every ordinance, well, I don't have one in front of me, on the second page of every ordinance, or the last page of every ordinance, there's an effective date for it.
Yeah.
So when we passed the budget on July 1st, there was an ordinance that night that was referred to ordinance committee for all the increases in the budget that had to do with non-collective bargaining positions. That wasn't voted on. October. Can't do that, okay, because I gave raises on 7/1 because you guys passed it in the budget. So I needed an ordinance that allowed me to do that, and I didn't have it. So we have to take ordinances in order, always in date order, and if there's something on an ordinance that you don't like, then you need to defeat it and then maybe resubmit it at a later time with changes.
Well, that's why I'm so concerned
Yeah,
of making sure we
they
do it
have to
right
be
this
in
time,
order
so that we
because-
don't make any mistakes.
Because, you know, it's like we left that one there and then took the HR one out of
Yeah,
order.
yeah.
And now we have things where it says, some say effective on passage, some have a particular date that ties to a position. And then we've got a mess trying to figure out when they're supposed to happen in our office for payroll purposes. So we kind of have to take them in order. And if there's something that you don't like on an ordinance that you want it to be changed, then maybe you defeat it and ask it to be represented later with the amendments so they can stay in date order. Because up until October, I had 0 ordinances in my office, and I knew I had submitted 4. And I had 0 passed ordinances.
But
Until
the
the
problem is
HR
that
one
it's-
went, so it was
the
like,
problem is
I was like,
it's
what's
not
happening?
the past
So, and when I finally got the last one, I understand what you're saying, that everyone that had happened was approved in that last one, except the city council and school committee part.
Yeah.
But they didn't happen in order by when we did things, by
Yeah.
date. So
No,
that's the
I-
only thing I want to just bring up to you, something
No,
to be
I understand,
cognizant
and I
of.
don't want that to happen again.
Yeah, we
because
can't.
it's,
It was
you know, I
very,
mean,
we were having a really hard time.
It was
with
still in
salaries.
our committee, it wasn't, you know, voted on yet.
Yeah,
So,
it was,
yeah, but we took care of it all right.
I think so. I think we're okay now, but
Yeah.
going forward, keep them in date order, that would be great. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Jim, sorry, I just wanted to bring that up.
Oh, you approve.
Take a motion.
No, they want to move it forward.
Yeah, based on a 3-year admin contract, it'll bring in line with 7/1. We want to make it into a fiscal year as calendar year for the ones that are already on there as of 1/1 of 24. Then the bottom portion will go into effect July right after, and it'll fall in line with admin.
So the system will
Every
be
3
as
years.
of 7/1/24,
7/1,
every 3
you'll start
years
going on to
thereafter.
3 years to follow
I
admin,
have a
okay?
little problem signing tonight without having it on paper in front of me.
Right.
We're only, it's,
How do we make a committee report that's not really completed?
Well, I mean, the top part is all right, and the bottom part, you just want to say, you're gonna cross out the 0 and 6 years, 0 and 6, and you're gonna change it to, a July 1st fiscal year coinciding with the admin contract, if you just want to write it in
Okay,
at the
so
bottom,
we'll sign
and then
it
you can
tonight.
sign it,
We'll sign it tonight, assuming that those corrections are gonna be made by
yes,
you.
and certainly as
Okay.
soon as I do it, I'll
Okay.
read it to you, I'll call you and show it to you, and I'll show it to Dan.
All right.
That's the intent, I think everybody is in agreement on that,
Yeah,
correct?
that's okay, I just wanna make
it's not
sure
finalized
that,
tonight anyways, it gets finalized at the full council meeting.
yeah,
Jimmy,
yes,
could I ask a question, please?
yeah.
Just one question. I'm gonna play the devil's advocate, Sharon, to this. What if, through the chair, what if the admin don't agree on a contract for 4 years, what happens to our part of the contract?
Well, nothing.
Dixie.
I'm sorry, my apologies. I don't mean to laugh because.
It won't happen.
Yeah, if they don't
It
agree on
won't
it for
happen.
4 years, that's
But
outrageous.
It could take, I mean, the law says you can't do, national law says you can't have retroactive salary increases farther back than July first of the preceding year. So chances are you're never gonna go more than a year and a half, but I've seen that happen.
I mean,
I'm
that's
sure
why I'm
Mayor Beth
asking
has
it.
seen that happen at school.
I'm just wondering what would happen.
I mean, at the end of the day, whatever would happen
All
would
right,
be better than
Sharon,
waiting
thank you.
11 years.
That's a
So,
lot of retro.
you lose 6 months of an increase, but you're not losing 11 years.
You never know with collective bargaining.
I
I've done it, so
Jim, I
I
just
know.
have a question, thank you. All right, this
Go
is
ahead.
just a question that came actually from the school committee, and there was a fight. So it was agreed by the school committee that they weren't gonna go retro till July 1st, when that contract would begin.
That's happened on the city side too.
That's happened on the city
There's been
side?
times when the mayor has said, we are not doing retro. We're finally resolving this. It's taken forever. The raise is going to affect, it might even be January 1st. It's funny, you don't know, but it's for that fiscal year. So there have been times where there has not been retro.
Okay, so
It could happen.
Yeah, it could even happen like a whole year later. So instead of, say, July
It's all
1st,
what collective, that's why I said, this is linked to what admin does.
okay.
That's
Exactly.
City council,
Better
city
than
council,
11 years
right?
of nothing.
Every
Right
3
where you
years.
want it down here.
I'll make
I
the
hope
motion
so.
to, approve as stated, if you want me to
Job
restate it.
doesn't have to work. They went to
I'm
school.
gonna have the lawyer look at it and make sure that we're okay.
If I understand the language correctly that we're proposing here, it's to read that Group 1 salaries for the mayor, treasurer, collector.
Time to vote.
I wanna make sure people can hear me, so I'll wait. Excuse me? Excuse me? I just wanna make sure I understand this language correctly. So it should read, Group 1 salaries for the mayor, treasurer, collector, clerk, assessors, president of the city council, city councilors, 12, vice chairman of the school committee, and school committee members shall be adjusted every 3 years effective July 1, 2024, by the sum of the preceding 3 years' percentage wage increases for the administrative employees collective bargaining unit agreement. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that sounds pretty good.
exactly what it is.
Okay,
Do you want it to be preceding 3 years?
yes.
Why does it have to be? So if you're starting on July 24th and you're going back 3 years, you're crossing over 2 collective bargaining contracts. All right, if that's what you want to do. I thought we were going to link them to the 3 years. You're going to, whichever way you want to go, I don't care. You know what I mean? Because when did the new one start? 7/1 of 22? I keep asking that, or is it 7/1 of 21?
22.
Okay, so this one goes FY 23, FY 24, FY 25. So made it 7/1 of 24. Don't say, why do you have to say the preceding?
Where are you taking it?
If it was 7/1/24 going forward, it ties right into that contract.
Yeah, how much?
Well, it does.
So actually,
It
I
does.
prefer preceding.
Okay.
That makes a lot more
I mean,
sense.
the city doesn't ever get more, the city.
Agree with you, Paul.
Yeah.
Preceding makes more sense.
No. Oh, wow. Do you see that?
I know.
That's cool.
Contract.
One of these guys that signs things that I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I have it typed here.
I can't hear you at all.
Does that
I hear
help
your mouth
you?
moving, I hear nothing.
It'll take us 2 minutes for her to run downstairs and grab it. Sam, do you mind grabbing this from the printer?
Well, I think Paul just did it.
I'm more comfortable knowing what we're
No,
doing
that's
here.
fine.
If you give her about 2 minutes, she'll be back with
Okay,
it.
all right, thank you. We'll attach it to this, okay. Gonna have him. About here, but church.
Can't hear you.
Asked her, when was the last time? Oh, getting a raise in.
On the ordinance, it says you did.
I don't make 108. I would love to make 108.
You didn't get it.
Not us, the mayor, not us.
15 years.
When's your contract up?
24.
Got one. Maybe I was looking at the other elected officials. That's right, you didn't vote one for yourself. It's been a long time. Right.
No.
Where is he?
No. He wasn't just afraid to lose the vote.
You're right, I stand corrected. It was the other elected officials. Counselors, they got Guzman.
Then I get a nice text from a city councilor. From a councilor that,
Remain nameless?
For the record, the mics are on and the recording is on.
Okay.
It's not a real council meeting if I don't have to remind y'all of that every single time.
everybody's listening.
I know.
Harry?
Hey,
Thank you. I had my salad. Won't be that long.
All right, that's right, Judge, there's only one item.
I know, but I looked at it, I was, looks like it's pretty straightforward.
Makes sense.
I told
Darren could.
Yeah, I got mine.
They all need to be addressed. I'm surprised they weren't. Oh, no, I get that.
I guess.
File and insert. I know, I talked to them about it. I agree with you. I entirely agree with you.
Put it correct. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, there's specialized compensable factors between that job and what the chief of litigation. It should have been addressed a long time ago.
I don't know what the hell you're saying.
I had talked to him recently about it.
It all should be made.
Right. That language work for everybody? I just printed out extra copies just in case. Yeah, no problem.
Favorable.
Yes.
Motion to approve
Motion.
the, amended ordinance. Roll call, we gotta do a roll call too, don't we? Yep.
Tillotson,
Yes.
Crumpets,
Yes.
Dobos,
Yes.
Labrie,
Yes.
Roy.
Yes.
Motion to approve the minutes for October 11th.
Both in favor?
Aye.
Tillotson, Tillotson,
Yeah, roll call.
Tillotson,
Yes.
Crumpets,
Yes.
Dobos,
Yes.
Labrie,
Yes.
Roy.
Yes.
Ed does.
Motion to adjourn? Motion to adjourn.
Councilors Tillotson,
Yes.
Crumpets,
Yes.
Dobos,
Yes.
Labrie,
Yes.
Roy.
Yes.
He's out of here, he's going.